I'm Lauren Kling, and this is 5 Things That Changed Your Life. Each episode, I sit down with a special guest and ask them to share 5 stories, events, or experiences that had an impact on their life, like a person who helped them decide a path to take, or a place that completely transformed the way they think. Perhaps it was inspiration from a family road trip or a childhood TV show that helped them to make the person they are today. This week's guest, Steve Harper.
I was on a panel at one of these festivals talking about creating my web series with a bunch of other web series creators. And I suddenly realized that everybody else on the panel kept talking about wanting their web series to go to TV. And I was a person who had come from TV to do web series. I was like, oh, wait a minute. Maybe on some level I've already arrived. And this is obviously something really great to do. But all these people want to get to where I've already been and where I intend to go back to. So it actually allowed me to be a little more celebratory.
Steve is a television writer, playwright, and a creativity coach, where he specializes in helping writers craft dramatic scripts. Among his own TV writing credits are the ABC series American Crime and USA Network's Covert Affairs. His web series Send Me has won multiple awards and garnered an Emmy nomination for its lead, Tracy Toms. Joining me in my conversation is my co-host, Alan Ng. Steve Harper, welcome.
Thanks. Really glad to be here. This is exciting.
Thank you. Would you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yes. Wow. Where to begin? I'm a television writer and playwright. I'm originally from New York, live in Los Angeles now, and I'm also a creativity coach, and I coach writers who are interested in putting writing in the driver's seat of their life, as I did. And yeah, I do a bunch of different things.
Right. Now, I know a little bit about you. We've worked together before.
Yes.
But what's interesting is you're not just a writer and you're not just a coach. You're also, I want to say, an inspirational coach. I feel
thank
like
you.
I'll
take that.
Yeah. I feel, you go and you take a class from somebody and they teach you A, B, and C. But I've always gotten the impression that you are more like a Christine Aller, who I mention on every other episode.
She's amazing. What a great example.
I feel like you give more of soul into script writing. Am I
Thank
wrong?
you. No, I think you're right. I'd like to think you're right. Anyway, I feel like I spent a lot of time in my life trying to figure out what it is I do and asking a lot of people well, how do I write? How do I write professionally? And where do I go? And who do I talk to? And, and you get the requisite slightly dumb answers that some people who are not in the industry sort of say, well, why don't you try blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And then some people in the industry many of whom end up being really guarded about what happened to them and who they work with, who their agent is and who they studied with and what their secrets are and how they write and how they don't write. And, that becomes really sort of tiring after a while.
Right.
And so when I amassed a certain amount of knowledge, I realized that I really wanted to pass on not only the nuts and bolts information, but the inspiration too, because it's, I felt like I went to a bunch of different graduate schools and stuff and learned how to do things, and everybody teaches you how to do the craft.
Right.
People don't teach you how to live the life of the person who does the craft.
Right.
And that's
the
part
soul,
of my focus.
the inspiration.
Yeah.
I think that, the ups and downs and the behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And
how do you survive that stuff? And what do you do? And where do you go? And all of that. That's really, to me, that's the juice, and it's really fascinating.
Right.
And nobody talks about it.
So are you saying that people wouldn't share because they were afraid of training the person that would replace them?
Well, I don't know it's that calculated, but I do think there are a lot of people and a lot of interview shows where people will say, they'll be talking to a writer or an actor or a director, and the person will say something like, and then I got that big movie. And they're like, oh, wow, how was the big movie? And they skip the part about how they got the big movie. What did they do to do that? Did they think they were going to get it the whole time? Who did they talk to? Did they network? Did they, what did they do? Did they pray? Did they meditate? Did they hog tie somebody? None of those details are almost ever on display. And so I feel like people are just used to telling the big success story without talking really about the day-to-day survival story.
Yeah. I think that's been one of the joys of this show and listening to other shows is hearing people's struggles and those other stories that you don't hear all the time.
Yeah, I think it's essential to share that stuff because I just think there's not enough of it.
Yeah, of course. All right. So the first thing that I'm going to ask you about, you said trading in your electric typewriter for a Mac during college, and then after you drank the Apple computer Kool-Aid and eventually spent 10 years teaching computer skills to people of all ages. Now, Alan was dying for this to be the very first topic of conversation.
'Cause I actually sold the Macs when they first came out.
Oh, wow. I know a lot of people like you, yes.
I mean, it was, for me, it was transforming. It was,
Oh, yeah.
No longer having these dot matrix printers, having nice type, letter quality, as they called it.
Yeah. And I was a little envious of people like you because I felt like, although I was a user and really dug it, I was like, oh, those are the people inside. They're like the insiders, and I was envious.
Well, it was an easy sell, and we got commissions off of selling the Macs. And I mean, it's just, like I said, revolutionary.
Well, in high school, our class was the first year to get an Apple for the yearbook. So that was a new thing.
That's pretty cool, yeah.
When you guys started talking, all of a sudden that idea that I've forgotten long ago flashed in my head.
Yeah, it's so funny. My dad, I mean, this all started, my dad is a big typewriter guy. He's always been a typewriter guy. And I, I was, even before writing was in the driver's seat of my life, I was, I would write poems and short stories and stuff like that. And so my father bought me this electric typewriter to go off to college. And before that, though, he insisted that I take typing class, in high school. My high school didn't teach typing. So, because I went to this Quaker prep school, that's a whole other story. But because my mother's a guidance counselor and she wanted me to go to a really good school, to get into a really good school. So I was going to the public high school in the town that I lived in, which was far away from where I went to high school, for typing class. And I was just a horrible typing class student, and everyone else, it seemed like, was really amazing.
Right.
And here I was, like, with this sort of, kind of highfalutin sense of myself going to my little prep school, and I couldn't type at all. And I would get yelled at by the teacher and stuff. And it was really embarrassing. So I went to school with the typewriter, having learned a little bit to type. And then the whole world changed when the Macs came out.
And so,
in what way? How did struggling on a typewriter change when the Mac came along?
Well, I mean, first of all, like, the typewriter for me, because I kept making so many mistakes, was all about whiteout.
Yes.
So I would do these papers and I'd be like, oh, I got
So you didn't have a select trick on you.
Yeah. It's like, oh, I got it. This is terrible, or that looks really bad, or I just need to type this page over, or whatever it was. And, and the computer changed everything. I just didn't, nobody would see my mistakes if I corrected them before I printed it out. And that was remarkable.
Yeah, that was the day where you either had to write out your whole paper and then type it out, or just type and hope you and live with what you've just written.
Yes, right. This whole conversation makes me feel so ancient. So like, back in the day before technology arrived. It is totally back in the day.
How did your dad, who was a lover of typewriters, how did he face this technology of...
Oh boy, he's still struggling with it. I mean, he really hasn't mastered it. One of the things that's so interesting for me is, so after college, I ended up teaching computer skills for 10 years, which was amazing. And I didn't plan on the 10 years. It just sort of happened. And I was, my life was focused on being an actor, and I was not getting the kind of acting work or as much acting work as I wanted to pay the bills. And I went to this thing, there's a thing called the Actors Fund, which is a sort of a social service organization that helps out actors and creative people. And they had something that at the time was called the Actors Work Program. Now they call it the Career Center, where you or any professional or semi-professional performer or creative person can go and take classes to get what they call meaningful sideline employment, So I kind of, sort of slunk in there one day feeling like, I don't really want to do this at all. And among the things I did in addition to learning how to, create different resumes for myself, was I took a series of computer classes. And at the time, I knew a bunch of stuff about the Mac, but this was all the PC, because it was a lot of stuff that you might do in business settings and, places I really didn't want to work, but needed to be trained to do work in those spaces. And so what ended up happening is, after I took all their courses, they had 4 or 5 courses, and after I took all of them, the other thing about this Career Center is that they have job listings. So the day I finished, I think it was the day or the week or the weekend or the week after I finished all of the courses, I get a call from somebody at this organization saying, hey, we have this job. Now that you've learned everything, you want to teach it? So like, I guess.
Was this in New York or in
This
LA?
was in New York.
Because there's an LA branch that I've been a part of, and I've
Yes.
taken the classes as well.
It's amazing. It totally changed my life. So I went to the Doormen and Janitors Union, and there had been this settlement with the union and with management where the doormen and janitors got brand new computers, but a lot of their members didn't know how to use them. And so part of that was that there was going to be training so that those people could learn how to use these computers. So I was one of a handful of people who taught these union members how to. There were a couple of different classes. One of them was just how to use the computer from taking it out of the box. And we'd start with it in the box, and then you'd pull it out of the box. And then I had to create my own curriculum about how do you use the mouse?
We laugh, but this is what we learned to do, and then we tried to
Absolutely.
teach our parents.
Yes, and this is the stuff my father's still trying to master, every time I talk
Today.
to him. Yes, yeah. And I actually had a series, but one friend in particular who's very, technologically savvy and, does a lot of websites and stuff and, like you do. And she just completely made fun of me about the fact that I was teaching people how to use the mouse and, how to use Excel and, basic Word and all that stuff. But it was amazing to see. I mean, this was, to me, was the big lesson of it. I kept thinking, oh, this is going to be the worst job in the world. And what ended up happening was, my parents are retired teachers, and I don't know if I'd done a little bit of teaching before that. I think I had done some in college. But the notion of seeing the light bulb go off, and seeing people like just how, their eyes lit up and they just had this new sense of what was possible and what they could do, and they felt so empowered, and it just was one of the most remarkable things. So I ended up doing that for a bunch of different unions. I hung out a shingle and started, I would go to people's homes in New York and I would teach people. And then I eventually got hired by a live corporate events company in New York as their in-house computer trainer. And I was there for several years and would do not only group trainings when they rolled out something new, but I would go to somebody's desk and I'd give them, I had my own curricula of Excel 1 and 2, Excel 1, 2, and 3, and Word 1, 2, and 3. And it was amazing.
Did all of those years of teaching computer skills help you today? Is there anything you learned, a trade you picked up there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a geek. I just really enjoy playing around with my computer. Obviously, I'm a writer, so I do that. But I just love, I'm into Twitter, and I do what I can do on my own website, and
Right.
I keep a lot of different spreadsheets of mileage and things that are not all that fun. But I kind of get into it. There's something about being able to do those kinds of things for myself that I think is cool.
Did you get into coding at all, or BBSs, bulletin boards, or games?
Not really. A little bit of game stuff, very little bit of game stuff, but not a whole lot of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're
I was like a limited geek.
yeah, got it. Yeah.
Yeah. So how did your acting career kind of parallel along with this? Was there that temptation to maybe go into that full time?
Oh, no. No, I wasn't really that interested in it. But what was great about it is, especially, either hanging out my own shingle or working for this live corporate events company where I got to do this part-time, I had a lot of freedom to do almost anything. I could audition for things, I could book stuff, I could, switch things around. The only issue was if I were to book something and go out of town, then that was kind of something to negotiate with my bosses. But other than that, it created this amazing sense of freedom that I could, and the pay was really great too. I was sort of surprised that the pay ended up being so great. So I could really work part-time and support myself and then do all my other fun things. And that actually, I think, is part of, that sort of set me up for the future. I really do look at my life today as I do a handful of things sort of piecemeal, and I put together a life, and it's really fun because I'm sort of like, what do I want to do? And let's do this thing that I love to do, and then this other thing that pays the bills a little bit, and then let's do this other thing that seems to, my whole life is like that.
Right. I think that's difficult for a lot of people,
Yes.
especially in the arts. Somebody not in the arts thinks, I got to struggle to be an actor.
Yes.
But you don't know that there's that part of paying the bills.
Right. Yes.
But you can have both.
Yeah, I think you can, and I think it can be a lot easier than people think. There's something that I feel like my whole sort of freelance life and having jobs like the computer training job has really sort of set me up well for the 21st century, because now we're in this age where, quote unquote, nobody has that, full-time job that our parents had like way back in the day for the rest of their lives, like from when they're 20 to when they're 80.
It's the gig economy where we're all finding our own gigs.
Yes, and I think some people are, or I've worked with people who are struggling desperately sort of around the idea of that, like, because I think there's some cultural notion that it shouldn't be that way. Like, why is it, what a burden. And I feel like I've learned so early on to kind of incorporate that kind of dance in my life that I don't see it as a burden. I just see it as like, where's the next adventure? Like, what can I lean into now? Like, what's the next fun thing?
Right. Did your family, anybody in the family think, oh my gosh, an actor, you better find yourself that job and you're going to retire?
Yeah. That's sort of like everybody in my family. I mean, they're supportive. And at the same time, on some level, I don't think they ever, even now, they sort of understand what it is I do or how I do what I do. I mean, as I said, my parents are teachers. So when I went to college, this wasn't the world's most practical suggestion, but my parents were not really interested in me majoring in theater, 100%. So I was an English and theater studies major. Not that English is like the world's most, I know, right? Wait a minute. Yeah. So, but that was my concession to them. And it was, a real major in addition to the theater stuff.
They didn't care what an English degree meant.
Yes, it was just a better degree to get than just the theater degree. More market. My father's always saying, "Well, you can always teach." I mean, he says that today, and I do some teaching, but he's always pushing for that. It's
some real teaching.
Yeah, so like 100% teaching. It's like, no, Dad, that's you, not me.
Do you think you can be a good teacher if you're not working in that field? Like, can you be a good acting coach if you're not actively working yourself?
That's a great question. I think, look, people obviously do it, and I actually have a kind of a psychological block against that, because there are so many, no offense to these people, but there's so many like casting directors who teach acting, or, it's like, how does that, I mean, I get it on some level, because people want to be with people who are connected to the industry, who have some expertise in what actors do or how they come across or whatever. But I do think that there's something, it happens too in the writing industry, because there are a lot of writing coaches who have been studio executives, or who have, run writing programs, or there aren't that many who are in the trenches as writers. I mean, there are some, and I do think that there's some good flavor and good opportunity to be had, and information to be passed on by people who are working alongside the thing that they teach. I don't want to go so far as to say like people who aren't doing it in the way that, in that sort of committed way are not good teachers. But I think there's an advantage and a kind of a special sauce for people who are doing it.
I call it an advantage. I think some people are better teachers. And so I don't discount people who maybe try to work in an industry who said, you know what, I'm better at teaching or instructing or supporting or guiding, holding somebody's hand than I am doing it myself.
Yes.
And oftentimes I think it's easier for us to critique somebody else's work than our own.
Yep, I agree with that. Yeah. And I also think too, I mean, part of it is, I think all of us as artists ought to find inspiration and education where we can find it. So I think it's really great. I think for somebody to connect with a teacher, like regardless of what that teacher's discipline is, or, they might really be a meditation teacher, but they teach really great relaxation techniques for actors. And I think that's a great thing.
Yeah. All right, you hosted a Baltimore kids show. That sounds like a dream.
Does it?
Possibly.
Work is work. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it's more than work is work. I work with fifth graders right now, volunteer.
Yes. Yep.
And I find them right on the precipice of turning into, right before teenage years,
Yes.
when they're discovering what they can get away with.
Right.
So
Yeah, that's tough.
There's a little bit of innocence, but I find it so fascinating how free and open their minds are. And we work on it. It's called Script to Stage with young storytellers.
Oh, cool.
And we help them to write a 5-page script.
I love that.
So you said you hosted a Baltimore kids show.
Yeah. I mean, look, I scoff now, but it really changed my life. It was, it was probably one of the best jobs I ever had. And actually at the end of the job, and I'll talk all about that because it was so interesting. But at the end of the job, I said to my family and friends, I said, it gets bigger than this, but it doesn't get better than this. And I really meant that. I ended up getting hired for this show, and that was an interesting story too. I was working at the Maryland Film Commission at the time, and I was new to Baltimore, and I moved there with my partner at the time, whose family lived not far from there. And so I got this job, actually, and we moved from New York. So I was like, what am I doing? I was like, my career, my life is over. Like, how can I, how did I let this man talk me into, but I moved, and I got this job at the Maryland Film Commission. I was sitting at the desk there, and I was in charge of the hotline, which was basically you get all the information about what's happening arts-wise, and I would make a little recording that says, like, here are the arts jobs for the week, kind of thing. And there was a guy named, it wasn't his real name, but a personality on the Fox affiliate in Baltimore who was known as Captain Chesapeake. And Captain Chesapeake was retiring, and they were trying to find a new host to come in, and he had this kids club, and they wanted to revamp it and sort of modernize it and update it for the it was the 90s. Yeah, right. Yes. Anyway, so I saw this notice, and I thought, oh, well, before I put this on the hotline, I'm going to send my stuff in, and then I'll put it on the hotline.
Did you do it just because it's work, or was there something you really found interesting about it?
I had majored in theater in college, and I had done some episodic TV in New York, and I was dead set on being an actor, and I moved to Baltimore, where I was like, my life is over. So I thought, this looks like a way to act and a way to, maybe create stuff and be on TV and get some experience doing that. Like, that's really good for this kind of, Baltimore kind of feels like a big small town. I was like, okay, for this big small town, this job could be really good, So I sent some information in, and I was the first resume they got. They told me later, resume and video. It was video back then. And they called me in, and interestingly enough, there were two other producers, and they auditioned. I don't know, there were like 20 of us at the callback or something like that. And then they started matching us up for some reason. And what I found out later was that one of the producers really wanted this other guy, and the other producer really wanted me. And then they were like, well, let's go to the owners of this station and see if we can convince them to let us hire both these guys. So suddenly I was part of this duo.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And the show was called the Fox 45 Clubhouse. And the other guy was a guy named Kenny Curtis, who works now for Sirius XM radio in the DC area. And so we got matched up as a team, and we played these two, it's like these two kind of, I don't know.
Yes, describe your outfit. I'm sure for a kid's show it was fascinating.
It wasn't like Tweedledee or Tweedledum. It was sort of like, it was kind of like, Bill and Ted hang out in a treehouse. It was just like, we were these two guys, and we hung out in this treehouse, and we did puppets. We each did, so Kenny would be there, and I would be the puppet. And then the next scene, I would be there, and he would be the puppet, and, that kind of thing. And then we would announce birthdays, and we hosted a telethon, and we had a magazine, and we would appear in malls, and
I want your autograph already. We're not even halfway through the show.
You don't.
Did you have kids in the studio?
Sometimes we would have kids who came in and did the birthdays with us, and so it's this little studio in Baltimore with a little camera, and lots of our kids would come in super excited, and then they'd get in front of camera and they'd be super scared, and we'd have to like prompt them, to,
right?
Like, oh, it's okay.
It sounds like the classic, like Mrs. Doubtfire, the classic things.
Yes, classic for sure.
And can we find this on YouTube right now?
There is a little bit on YouTube. Yes.
Do you have more?
Do I have more than that?
Do you have more footage?
I do. I think, but it's all like videotape and stuff.
Oh,
but
well,
I
that's
have
no
some.
problem.
Yeah. I think I do have some of it. I don't watch it. Actually, I do every Saturday night. No, I'm just kidding. I haven't seen a lot of it in quite some time.
Around that same time, Tom Bergeron was doing a show on the new, was it Fox or one of those networks was doing a show where it was supposed to be an apartment. It was Tom and some other guests.
Really?
Yeah, Tom Bergeron. Yeah, I
How
can't remember
funny.
the name of it, but it was like a house, and they would have people come over and do goofy things inside.
Well, there's that guy, Mike Rowe, who does that Dirty Job show. He had a show in Baltimore. He was doing some stuff in Baltimore, I think, at the same time on a local station. And of course, Oprah had been in Baltimore before I got there, and it was also interesting too because this was sort of the demise of the whole thing, which is part of it, the interesting part of the story. So Fox 45, actually, the guys who ran the station there at Fox are now sort of a notorious. They're a much larger. These are the Sinclair brothers. So Sinclair Broadcast Group.
Oh, I've heard the name.
Yeah, they're notorious conservative guys, and so it was very interesting because Kenny and we wanted to come in there, and he was in the movie Cry Baby, which they shot in Baltimore, and he had an agent, and we wanted to try to get them to pay a little bit more than this. They were going to give us $20,000 a year, and so I had an attorney and he had an attorney, and we sent documents to these guys, the Smiths, and it was so interesting because they called us into their office, and they were like, you will not get one penny above this amount of money. You either take this job or you leave it, And so that was kind of the flavor of what these guys were like, which was so interesting. But the end of the story is they started to launch a news operation, Fox 45 News at 10, which was their big moneymaker. And they really stopped caring about us. Our offices were literally in the basement. And they just prioritized the news. Actually, a lot of the newscasters, the people who were on that newscast, are doing some really amazing things. In fact, there was a camera guy who now is one of the hosts of Entertainment Tonight. He's like the host.
What?
I know.
Really?
It's kind of crazy. But the way it all sort of ended, for me at least, was they had bought a new station. There was a new building, and there was an old building, and we had our set, and our executive producer had paid somebody to make our set, which was this interesting treehouse thing. And he wanted people to come and refurbish it. And on one day when we were supposed to do that, his boss came into his office and said, "We don't have any money to do any refurbishment of your set. So you get your hosts and some screwdrivers, and you take that set apart and you carry it across the street yourself."
Wow.
And there we were, there I was, like carrying parts of the clubhouse across 41st Street, thinking, I'm done with this job.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think the very next week I put in my notice. I just thought, I had bigger plans than that.
But what an experience.
Amazing, because we also got to co-write and co-produce the show. So I got to sort of, come up with stuff. We wrote everything, and we would go around to schools and to other events, and we would do sort of David Letterman style, like crazy interviews. And I got to produce several of those, and it was an amazing experience for as long as it lasted.
So when you say it was the best experience that you would never experience again, was it the freedom you had?
I think it was look, I feel like on some level I'm getting to experience those things as a TV writer now. What I said is it doesn't get better than this, but it does get bigger than this. So just the notion of being able to sort of be involved in every aspect and just dream up stuff and be like, well, how about this? Let's do that. And then like to be able to do it, and also to be on camera and also to be like editing stuff. And it was extraordinary in all those parts of my brain that it used.
Yeah. And I think that's a freedom that leaves all of us once we leave childhood, that freedom to think crazy and think outside the box.
It's gone.
Which I think has returned in a lot of ways with social media and YouTube.
Yes.
And so the idea that, the millennials really can create now, like, because they grew up with video cameras being prolific.
Yes.
And for me, that was the time where computers were just coming into the scene and video cameras were just coming into the scene, but we couldn't really produce and edit and throw it up somewhere where people would see it.
Yeah, we're kind of on some level, in some ways, depending on who the artist is, I guess. I have this judgment that we're sort of at the far end of that. So it's kind of like now anybody can do anything and put it out there. And there are plenty of things that I've seen that I'm sort of like, oh, what am I watching here? Like I don't know what is this,
Yeah.
And so that's both good and bad. I mean, I never want to discourage people from doing stuff, but I do believe that there's a sense of when anybody can do anything, it's like, well, how do you determine quality, and what becomes the game changer, and what, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a sea of the same.
Yes, right.
And to find the one that stands out. And I think people are trying to do that. They're just trying to find that thing that sets themselves above, the millions of others doing it.
But that's the other thing that I think is really interesting too, because there's certainly among aspiring TV writers, and when I talk to people, and I think also among all the things that you see people do, there can be now this self-consciousness around like, what's going to get attention? How can I break through? As opposed to, there's something nicely organic about a genuine idea that comes out of your life that actually is, super specific and personal to you, that hits because it's super specific and personal to you, rather than you went into the laboratory to try to, come up with the next big thing. I think there's a lot of that happens these days.
Yeah. And this podcast included, and Alan and I have talked about this, the idea is great and wonderful, and I still wonder, wow, I can't believe I'm producing something. But then there's the reality of, do I want it to get noticed? Am I going to pay attention to how many listeners there are?
Yeah.
And sometimes,
what's the answer to that?
You know what? I keep going back to doing what makes me enjoy life. Sorry, Alan.
No. I mean, I feel the same way. It's you just hope that the quality speaks for itself,
right?
And that people. The nice thing about podcasts is it lives out there.
Yes.
And someone 3 years from now can download your first episode and then just get caught up in it.
True. In a lot of ways, we want instant gratification. And, oh boy, when you're at the bottom of a hill or even halfway up a hill looking up and you don't see the top, sure, it's different than when you're at the top looking down saying, all right, I see that it took 5 years or 7 or 10 years, but look at what's come out of persistence.
Yes.
And so I think the point now is, in a lot of ways, what I've heard for being an artist or an actor, you've just got to, you stick it out longer than everyone else. That's how you make it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and sort of in some ways keep doing the next creative thing that occurs to you.
Hey everybody, it's Lauren. Just wanted to break into the conversation real quick to invite you guys to tell us something that's changed your life. A person, a place, or a moment in time. Tell us one thing, or tell us up to 5 things. But for each one, keep it to 1 or 2 sentences. And then email us your list to 5things@5thingspodcast.com. That's FIVETHINGS@5thingspodcast.com. We'll share some of your things on future episodes, and perhaps we'll have one of you on as a guest. Also, we'd love it if you would leave us a nice 5-star review on iTunes or on your iPhone's podcast app. Just search for 5 Things That Changed Your Life and let us know what you love about the show. All right, let's get back to the conversation.
You created a web series, and you say that after writing on a TV show for a few years, you decided to create your own series for the web with a crazy premise.
Yeah.
So I love this premise. So tell me about this premise, because... Oh, go ahead. You first.
Okay. Well, all right. So first let me back up and just say that I wrote for 2 seasons on Covert Affairs on the USA Network, which was super cool. I learned a bunch. I actually ran into my boss, my Covert Affairs boss yesterday. But it was super cool. I learned a lot, and great bunch of people and interesting show. There's a bunch of things to say about that show. I won't say them all, but I will say that they really liked my writing. They read a couple of things that I wrote, and I sat down with these 2 guys, and they're super cool guys, and other people from the studio and the network, and it was cool. And one of my bosses said, we feel like the writing is like the most important thing, that all the CIA stuff all that jargon and the political stuff and the historical stuff. We feel like you can learn all that, but we really want somebody who's a good writer. And, so I was like, okay, great. Well, I'm sort of incredibly handicapped in terms of like history and the CIA and all the political stuff. So I spent a lot of time trying to catch up and learn things and read stuff. And I wasn't as successful as I wanted to be. It was really challenging to be on that show because I just felt like there was a mindset there that I found myself for the entire 2 years I was on the show, like trying to reach for. Like it just didn't flow for me in a way, and I felt like I did some good work there, and at the same time I was kind of like, okay, well, when I left the show, I was like, I want to do something that feels, as we were talking about before, like intensely personal, like something that is absolutely feels like it somehow connects to the core of my being, and so in that way, it's going to be somehow easier to to work with, to create, and so not that I've time traveled back in time. I'll talk about that in a second. But so what I decided was I wanted to create a web series where, look, I'm a black guy. I am always on some level obsessed with race. Like I can't not be. Like I'd like, in some ways I'd like to not be, but I'm always obsessed with it. So I thought, well, what would happen if I created some kind of web series where I forced the audience to also be obsessed with race, like the whole time? And I thought, okay, how do I do that? And there were a couple of things that happened. One was I had seen this newscast, and interestingly enough, my mother had seen the same newscast in New York. There was this middle school teacher who was having her students reenact battles from the Civil War, and there was this newscaster who interviewed this young white girl about like what it's like to be a soldier. And she was like, well, it's really sad to see your friends die. And, she's wearing this little Union soldier outfit and stuff. And I just thought there's something so wrong about this. It really upset me. And I was having this conversation with my mother again. She's a retired teacher. And I was saying, Mom, that's totally wrong. Like, that's not the way. If you want to teach the Civil War, what you do is you have all the girls sit out. And then you have all the white guys battle it out. And maybe you have black troops if you want. And my mother was like, well, everybody would be upset. And I was like, Mom, that's what the Civil War is all about. So that was sort of in the mix of my brain. And then I was also aware that every time I've seen, or most of the time I've seen time travel shows, the time travelers are always white. And, they can sort of go to some place in time or country or whatever. And all they do is like they put on a hat and a little accent and they blend right in. And, right?
Yeah,
right. And so I always saw those shows and I was like, that would never work for me. I could never blend right in. So the whole notion of time travel and the whole notion of the Civil War kind of collided in my brain. And I thought, okay, what if you have a woman who has the ability to send people back in time to the days of slavery? And what if people want to go? Like it's sort of, in some ways, it's sort of like a reality series, And the question is always like, why do people want to go? And if you watch the series, which is called Send Me, and you can find it on YouTube, the characters will tell you, because part of the process is this 2-camera interview where they talk about why they would want to go. But essentially, people want to go in the same way that people want to jump out of airplanes, climb mountains, do dangerous drugs, all those things that we 21st century people want to do. They're thrill seekers, or they're people who want to test their ability to survive, or they want to learn something, or they think they're going to be better on the other side of it. So that was the premise. It's like, so I have this woman, I have these people, I have her family, her husband who doesn't want her to do this. And so I kind of sort of mixed that up in a cauldron of ideas. And actually, one of the ways I knew it was a good idea was the year before I actually wrote the script and shot it. My agent and manager, we were having a meeting about, TV staffing, and I had written a new pilot, which they seemed to like. But my agent said, well, I think we need something else, something a little darker, something a little more cable-ish. Do you have any ideas? He said, we're sending out these short stories now, which to me sounds like such a horrible idea. But, he's like 10-page. Is there something you could write? It's like a 10-page short story that we could throw in as a writing sample. And I was like, okay, well, I don't know, but I have this idea for this web series thing. And I told them the idea. And both my agent and manager at the same time, as if on cue, they were both like, write that. And I was like, okay. So I went home and I wrote a 10-page version of it and sent it to them. And it got me all these meetings. It was crazy, like all around town. And I thought, oh, this is an interesting idea.
But you wrote something that was so personal to
Yes,
you.
so
Again,
personal.
you weren't worried about what's going to sell. It was, what do I want to see?
Yes, right. What can I do that's going to engage me, that's going to feel out of the box, and the whole web series thing it just took off in crazy and wonderful ways. It was really exciting.
Yeah.
Did you get a feeling that even though you wrote it, that no one was ever going to produce it?
Well, I knew that I was going to produce it. I mean, that was the plan. Okay, I was like, if I do this, I'm going to produce it. I'm going to get, as many of my most famous friends to be in it. I'm going to be in it myself as an actor. I'm going to try to raise money. I wasn't sure how to do that at the time. I had all these questions about it, but I also knew that it was the next thing. Like I needed to do this next thing. And it was amazing. It was an amazing ride. We crowdfunded. I read this book about crowdfunding. I had a team. We didn't raise as much money as we thought we were going to, and then as much as we needed. And then we were able to shoot it anyway. And then I didn't have the money to edit it. And then, then that sort of went on for a while. And then I put in some of my own money, and some other money appeared. And then completely by accident, we got on BET.com, which was like the craziest thing, where I was talking to a woman. There was a woman I had met who I had been a judge in a contest with. And she said, well, I think my friend so-and-so would have some ideas for you. So I went to her friend and I sat down with that woman, and she said, well, I can't really help you, but I think my friend so-and-so will have some marketing ideas. Call him up. So I call up this guy, thinking he's going to give me some marketing ideas. And I had sent him the trailer, which we had made a trailer at that point. Even though we hadn't edited the series yet together. And so the guy said, well, I don't have any marketing ideas for you. It's like, all right. But he said, but I do work for BET, and I think you should, premiere it on BET.com. Let's do that. I was
Wow.
like, okay. I wasn't pursuing it. I wasn't chasing it down. The universe just dropped it in my lap. It was pretty incredible.
And then tell me about you ultimately got some recognition from the TV Academy.
Oh yeah. So then I started entering all these contests, and we did pretty well in a lot of them. And a friend of mine had become a Television Academy member, which those are the Emmy people. So I thought, well, I should become a Television Academy. I wasn't working at the time. I was like, I could use some recognition. I want to be, So and you have to apply, and they have to vet you. And I thought, I know I've been on Covert Affairs for 2 years, but I don't know. They're probably going to be like, nah, we don't want him, But I applied and I got in. And then once I got in, I'm getting all their newsletters and stuff. I thought, they made a big deal out of doing this web series Emmy stuff for the first time in 2016. And I thought, okay, well, I should apply for this, send my stuff in for the Emmy. Like, how, and here's the interesting thing that, almost nobody knows. I spent like a month or two talking. I have these two friends of mine who every week we talk about what we're up to and update each other and stuff. Sort of helps me move through my life. But every week for like a month or maybe two, I would get on this call and I'd just complain to these guys. I was like, I can't do it. I was like, who am I? Like, there's this Emmy thing. I just can't. Like, I would start to do it and then I would stop, and then it'd be like, this is never going to work, or this is ridiculous. You got to pay money. And I just kept feeling like it was the most absurd thing in the world. And then these guys were just like, get over yourself and just do it. Like, pay the money, get it done. And I sent the application in, and we got an Emmy nomination.
That's amazing.
Amazing.
But it's you tell this story that's like, wow, you made this production and all of these things, and you were on a TV series for a couple of years.
Yes.
Yet you didn't feel like you were worthy. God, self-worth is such a thing with everybody.
It's huge, yeah.
And not just in the art world, but I think especially when you're creative, you're always doubting yourself.
Yes. I mean, I think it's funny because I spent a year. It literally took me a year of like, entering some contests, and we got the Emmy nomination and all this stuff. And I was on a panel at one of these festivals talking about creating my web series with a bunch of other web series creators. And I suddenly realized, to your point, that everybody else on the panel kept talking about wanting their web series to go to TV. And I was a person who had come from TV to do web series. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. Like, maybe on some level I've already arrived, and this is like obviously something really great to do. But all these people want to get to where I've already been and where I intend to go back to. So it actually allowed me to be a little more celebratory because I was like, I'm not scrambling to climb up the mountain. I've just sort of, come across the lane to do this other thing, and we'll go back over to the mountain. And that was kind of revelatory.
Yeah, this was last year, you said? Or?
Yeah, this was it was the 2016 Emmys. So we went to the Creative Arts Emmys, and I rented a tux. And it was crazy. My lead actress, Tracy Toms, who's amazing, Juilliard grad, and I'd done the playwriting program there, and I knew her, and we had worked together, and we went to the Emmys. It was amazing.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah, thanks.
I envision myself sometimes getting an Emmy Award.
It may happen.
It'll happen.
Yeah.
I just have to keep up at this long enough.
Yes.
For me to meet that.
And get on television somehow. No.
You know what's crazy? If I don't get on TV, it's not the end of the world. I've discovered that I love entertaining audiences. And I've discovered that I love entertaining friends as parents. Some reason that's the age range of the people that I love to entertain because, and I told my mom this, because we grow up, a lot of us wanting to entertain our parents, especially if we're funny, and we want to make them laugh and their friends laugh. And when I do MC work for, middle-aged and older people, I love it. Mm-hmm. And so it's weird to say, I'd like to make a living from it, but TV to me would be just like, okay, sure.
Well, it's fascinating because I talked to a woman, producer named Jenny Powell, who's a friend of mine, who produced one of my web series, sort of hero shows, is a show called The Lizzie Bennet Diaries, which is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice. PBS co-produced it, and it's in these three-minute segments. So my episodes are 3 minutes based on that. But I went to see Jenny to talk to her about the whole Emmy thing and producing and all this stuff. And what she said to me, which was so great, which I think kind of gives hope for all of us, is they won the Emmy before the Academy sort of made a big deal about having an Emmy category. But the way they won it is there's an interactive category. And their show was so interactive because they had video and they had Instagram stuff and they had Twitter stuff and the characters had Twitter feeds. And so they created this sort of matrix, and they won for that. So you can do all kinds of things that are innovative in the space of media that are not sort of directly television, that can make you an Emmy winner.
There you go.
All right.
Do it.
Can we win an Emmy for the game show that Alan and I developed a game show?
Oh, excellent.
With interaction.
Yeah, we got to do more episodes.
We do. We're going to announce it here. No, we're not going to announce it here.
I want to know.
I told you how we can do it.
I know that's
it's possible.
We'll tell you afterwards.
Okay, great.
Okay. Let me make a note to edit out the part where we say, we're going to talk later, telling the audience basically, screw you. And now I have to add that part, too, to say, I just told the audience, screw you.
Now you got to take this part
out. You see the juxtaposition, the time travel, the issue with time.
That's right.
It keeps moving forward the more I keep talking.
Yes. It's funny how that works.
And I'm a huge time travel nerd.
Oh,
I love
cool.
reading time travel stories. I love watching time travel stories, except for the major networks time travel shows.
Oh.
Doesn't Timeless have an African American time traveler?
Yes, it does. Yes, that was the first time I'd seen that, which I was like, "That's pretty cool." So, what do you think of that show? You're not into it?
I have a problem with the way stories can be told on major network TV, the 1 hour dramas. I feel like procedurals are all the same.
Yeah.
I loved Grimm until I realized that it was a procedural wrapped in fairy tales.
Right.
And so many of so many shows are great ideas wrapped in procedurals.
Yes.
Somebody got murdered or killed, moitered or killed.
Yeah, moitered.
How are we going to, how are we going to solve the crime?
Yeah. So you get that. Yeah. So cable obviously is more serialized, and you prefer that kind of storytelling where it doesn't feel like cookie cutter.
It doesn't feel cookie cutter. It doesn't look cookie cutter. And I think you can take more chances and be darker.
Yeah, it's not network influence.
It's not.
Yeah.
Yes. I think there's a sheen on network shows of we really need to get an audience from all over the country.
It's such an interesting conversation, though. It's like this part of me is like, do you really want to talk about this? Because I can talk about this all day. Because I think one of the things that's so fascinating for better or worse, is that network shows, they make more of them by and large. So if you're going to make, Grey's Anatomy had 24 episodes this season. So if you're going to make 24 of something, then that procedural engine that's kind of all you got. Like, how are you going to, I think anybody would love to see a really well done, perhaps serialized show that actually could do 24 episodes in a season. But it's like, that's a great way to burn out writers. So you sort of hang these concepts on this, this tried and true formula that isn't all that interesting on some level. And at the same time, that's kind of the way to do it if you want to get 24 of these things cranked out in a season and, passed out to an audience.
True.
See, my thing is when success occurs, the networks then replicate it.
Yes.
Over and over again. I mean,
Right.
when Walking Dead came out, there was just one dystopian future show after another.
Yes.
And it's like, all right.
And people eat that stuff up, though, at the same time, So, I mean, not all of it.
But then they get
a lot
tired of it, and then they're
Yeah.
looking for the new thing.
Well,
Yeah.
that's right. That's true. If you love something enough, like time travel, you will watch other shows just
Yeah.
because you want to see how the story is told.
Right.
But you also need to watch more than just the pilot,
Yes.
because
for sure.
nobody knows what they're doing when they're shooting, writing, and producing a pilot.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Nobody knows what they're doing after that. It's kind of like, I can focus on this and then,
Right.
It's all a constant gamble. All the way
Yes.
to go.
For sure.
It is. Another thing that I know you're involved in, I don't know much about, is the Mankind Project.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
So talk about this. You said you took the leap to follow a friend's advice and participated in this weekend workshop around emotional literacy for men, and your life took a turn for the better.
Yes. Wow. That sounds so deep. Right.
Very deep.
Very deep.
But we get into that a lot on this
Yes,
podcast.
sure. I know you do. So I had a friend who in 2005, I think, we used to sort of hang out in New York every week and just like chat and catch up. And one week he showed up at this coffee shop and he was like, I just did the most amazing thing. You got to do this amazing thing. He was like, I did this amazing weekend, the Mankind Project. Like, you got in the woods and it's like, I can't describe it to you, but it's really amazing. And, I don't know if he said it was about emotional literacy, but he said it was one of the best things he'd ever done since moving to New York. He had lived upstate and all this stuff. And so he's like, I think you really ought to do it. I was like, okay. Like, what are you talking about? What is this? And so he told me a little bit about it, that it's a weekend where there's journaling and there's games and there's conversations and discussions and stuff. And it's really this sort of sense of discovery, personal discovery, and specifically for men with other men. And he said, go to the website, go to mkp.org is the website. And I went and I looked and I was like, okay, well, this seems okay. But I mean, I don't know. I was intrigued. And he just kept talking about it. I was like, after a while, I was like, Mark, stop talking about it. Like, shut up already. But I was intrigued because I had done, I've done a lot of like recovery work in my day. I've done a lot of therapy stuff. I've done a lot of different kinds of things, both in and out of the world of acting. And there was something intriguing to me about the notion of, I think on some level, there was an article I think it was in the Washington Post recently that talked about how the biggest, the biggest sort of epidemic or problem or challenge for middle-aged men in America is not, obesity or drug abuse or alcoholism. It's loneliness.
Yes.
And I think there's a whole thing where men in our society, we isolate. We stop having the kinds of friends we had when we were 12 or 10 or 7 or even in high school or college, and we start becoming sort of islands unto ourselves. And we stop talking about what's going on with us, what our lives are like, what our emotions are like, what our fears and our joys and our sorrows and our griefs, all of that stuff. We just sort of keep that to ourselves, and we sort of cloak ourselves in the idea that we're supposed to know how to do stuff. And I think that on some level like kills a lot of people, that they think that they need to be, this sort of solitary person. And so the Mankind Project was created in the 70s as part of the women's movement. It's been around for 30 years. I think that's 70s. 30 years, and more than 60,000 men have done this, the weekend, which is called the New Warrior Training Adventure. And it's basically an opportunity for men to learn about mentor each other, to create a mission of service for the world, to know why you're on the planet, and to be clear about our emotions. So I learned to be really clear about being able to say, like, I'm sad now, or I'm angry, or I feel shame, and so in our groups that meet after the weekend, if you choose to do those, we get the opportunity to continue to kind of keep that alive and sort of speak to the things that maybe at work or in other spaces of our lives that it's just, you don't really do that.
Yeah. And especially
amazing.
Men, because men
Yeah.
are supposed to be strong. But more we had another guest on another episode of this season who leads retreats for women. And
women do this kind of stuff all the time. That's one of the things, right?
Right. But you feel a little weird when you are a guy talking about emotions and talking about
Yes.
fears, or mentioning, hey, I see a therapist, or
Right.
I do meditation.
Yeah. And I think this kind of work, I think, really sort of hits that head on. So I've now been involved in the Mankind Project that was 2005. So going on 12 years. And at this point, I'm in a weekly men's group that I love that meets on Wednesday nights, actually, here in LA. And I also have become what they call a certified co-leader. So I now co-lead these retreat weekends. I'm one of the 3 men at the top of the food chain who sort of help make it run. And it's amazing.
Wow.
It's
What's
really
the
changed
age
my life.
range of the people that are
Anybody from 18 on up can do our weekend. And all kinds of men. I mean, it's really an organization that's sort of founded on and proud of the diversity of men. So men from, all religious backgrounds, and able-bodied men and differently abled men, and, gay men, straight men, bi men, trans men, all kinds of, anybody who identifies as a man is welcome to come to our weekend and do the work and, connect to their emotional lives and decide why they're on the planet. It's pretty amazing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Before we go, I want to ask you about something you said that really struck me early on. You said writing in the driver's seat of your life.
Yes.
Please talk about that.
Yes. Well, yeah. So I think when I was doing work as an actor, I was kind of, obviously, part of what the acting world is they say go here and you go, and I was doing a lot of that. I was sort of doing a lot of regional theater, living out of a box and kind of taking my stuff with me. And I thought, wow, after a while, I thought, I don't really want to do that anymore. I'd like to be home. I'd like to be home with my partner. I'd like to have a life where I can go somewhere and come back home and sleep in my own bed, all that stuff. And so, it started with my playwriting and deciding to create my own work, which I've also done producing of my own theater stuff. And today I'm really excited to be in LA and be writing TV because, writing for television, whatever you think of television, I mean, I kind of love TV, and I've always been a student and a child of TV. But it's it's a chance to be an artist and to come home every night. It's a chance to go to the office and work on stuff and write things and make stuff up and get well compensated for it and still be home at night. And that's remarkable. So for me to be able to do that and sort of live a, quote unquote normal life is one of the greatest joys of my existence.
Got it. So you're a driver rather than a passenger.
Yeah.
Having somebody else tell you how you can have a fulfilling life.
Yeah.
I like that.
It's amazing.
Well, Steve, thank you so much for being a
Thank
part
you
of
guys.
the show.
Really fun.
Thank you, as always, to my co-host Alan Ng and to this week's guest, Steve Harper. You can follow Steve at steveharpercreates.com and at his creative coaching website, yourcreativelife.com. On Facebook at facebook.com/yourcreativelife and on Twitter at Harper Creates. Also at Your Creative V Life. That's YOURCREATVLIFE. You can follow us online at 5thingspodcast.com or on Facebook at facebook.com/5thingspodcast, that's FIVE, or on Twitter at 5thingspod, that's FIVEPOD. Subscribe to 5 Things That Change Your Life on iTunes and leave us a 5-star review while you're there. We'd really appreciate it. You can also listen and download our show on Google Play, Stitcher, Amazon Alexa, or your favorite podcast service. Music by My Monthly Date. You can find them at facebook.com/mymonthly date. For 5 Things That Changed Your Life, I'm Lauren Kling.